Sam, who are you working for over there? Because it sounds like a dream job.
Yeah, it's amazing. So I'm 25, turning 26 on this later this week actually, and
Mm.
I landed this job. I went to Otago University, studying politics, started out doing law. Realized that
Yeah,
reading the Magna Carta wasn't for me, and
yeah.
then I got involved with Ian Taylor's company, Animation Research.
Oh, okay. You are tied up
Uh,
with them.
yeah, so I
Yeah,
I I freelance for them currently, because I was doing quite a lot of like landscape photography and through university, so I was
yeah,
doing a lot of like commercial campaigns and stuff. So I started my own company during university, and then I did that for half a year. Moved over to America sort of mid 2018, and I was working for a media company in Colorado over here, just doing adventure sports, sort of focusing on those guys. And then uh, around that same time, Ian Taylor's company landed a contract, well, with the PGA Tour in America. So we
yeah.
basically,
Oh, what a
uh,
great gig, man.
yeah,
What a
yeah,
good gig. Yeah,
it's cool. Like I float between America. I'm in America from March till sort of mid October each year, and then I
yeah.
work on the cricket tour in Australia for the summer. So
Oh, no.
we provide all the ball tracking technology and stuff. So
Yeah,
I work
yeah.
alongside like the umpires and the.
I've known Ian a long time. He's a great guy.
Yeah,
I'll
he's
tell you a story about him. America's Cup's in San Fran, right?
yeah.
We're in Nelson. Ian and I are sharing a platform in Nelson doing some leadership seminar bullshit thing.
Yeah,
And it's the day that they have the first lay day, and we're up, what was it, 5-zip or something?
six
Right?
nil or something. Yeah, something crazy like that.
6-0. And you had to get to 7 to win. And Ian's up there, and everyone said, "Oh, there's a lay day in the America's Cup." And of course, they're doing the graphic. What do you think's going to happen, Ian? And he says, "It's all over for us. The Americans will come back and win 7 straight races, and we will lose the America's Cup." And he was bang on. It was the most amazing sports prediction I have ever seen.
Yeah, that the America's Cup is incredible. Like like hearing our company's insights and stuff, like the behind the scenes going on, and how much of a billionaire playground it is. And if
Yeah,
things aren't going their way or the team's way, they just send in 20 engineers and
yeah, yeah.
just do the
Well, he had it, oh, and no one believed him. And I looked at him and I thought, man, I reckon he might have called it. And I rang him up. We sent him a message the day it happened. I said, most amazing sports prediction I have ever seen in my life.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, they're a really cool company to be involved with. I love sports. I love my rugby. I love cricket. I love golf. But then, like, I've got a politics degree, so I really like international relations and global affairs.
well, there's
And
plenty of politics in sport, mate.
yeah, there is, especially golf as well. I mean, golf is
Yeah,
similar to the
yeah.
America's Cup,
Danny
where
lost his card, huh?
Danny
Danny
Lee.
Lee lost his card.
I'm not aware of that, but it wouldn't surprise me. He hasn't been playing too well.
No, I read that a day or two ago. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that's horrible. So the season over here, the PGA Tour has just finished up. The
yeah.
last tournament was in Atlanta, and they were playing for $15 million. The top 30 in the world. So they were for a week's tournament, or for like the final. It was the final of the playoffs. They were playing for a purse of $15 million. Yeah, which is
I'll tell you what I really loved watching was the final round of the women's golf at the Olympics.
yeah.
That was just brilliant. You
How
know,
good how good
it was
did Lydia
brilliant
Ko
golf.
go? Yeah, Lydia Ko's
Yeah,
she's doing amazing.
yeah,
Yeah, she doesn't get the credit I think that she deserves in New Zealand. She doesn't get or women's golf and
yeah.
Lydia specifically. They don't get the same kudos as the men do. Well,
But
I think.
in terms of her sporting ethos, the way she approached the people she was playing with, her whole demeanour, it was just remarkable. I just felt, I just that's going to be one of the most memorable things I've seen in sport.
Yeah,
And the playoff, and she kind of, it was almost like she was happy just being there, and she was going to enjoy it and not, you know, kick herself to death over not winning the gold. It was fantastic. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. Right, let's crack into it. So
Okay.
I'm really stoked to have Sean Plunket on. He's an experienced New Zealand journalist. He started working as a journo for radio Radio Windy or Windy?
Windy.
Windy, yeah,
Windy.
back in
It was
1984.
in Wellington. Yeah.
He went on to work for Barry Soper in the press gallery for independent radio. He was a foundation staff member and did a few years at Fair Go before joining TV3 as its startup in 1989. After that, he joined Fair Go for a couple of years before moving on to Current Affairs and some more politics at TV3. From 97 to 2010, he was the co-host of the Morning Report on Radio New Zealand National. He's had his own radio show on News Talk ZB between 2011 and then to 2012, and starting 2013, he shifted to Radio Live and MediaWorks, and now known as Magic Talk. And earlier this year, Sean announced that he'd be leaving the station to pursue other avenues. 37 years in the business. You're an experienced bloke. It's great to have a chat with you. How are you?
I'm bloody good, and nice to talk to you through pretty good technology on the other side of the world.
Yeah, it's amazing this Zoom stuff. How's 2021 been treating you?
It's been bloody interesting. I think it's been interesting for everyone. We're just coming out of another lockdown in Wellington, and it's been all about the COVID and I guess getting through, and I've had my jabs. And in the meantime, I've been looking at what to do next, because, geez, you read through that CV, right, and there's like nothing left established that I can do. I've done it all. I don't know if I've outstayed my welcome, but I've kind of got bored with it. So I've spent, since Waitangi weekend, February of this year, and my departure from Magic, and I'm still working on setting up a new streaming talk radio show in New Zealand, and what I hope will grow into a site for podcasts, a site for commentary, and a player in the sort of media market in New Zealand.
Nice. It's sort of going to be long form, like free speech.
Well,
Right?
it'll be tradition for a start, a traditional talk type news platform delivered through the internet, through an app on your phone. Actually, you're getting the scoop here, actually, Sam, because I've got a whole lot of people lined up wanting to do an interview. I'm going to tell you, we'll just do it quietly. It's going to be called The Platform. And it is a platform that I build not for necessarily politicians or others to have their say, but for people to have their say. And it strikes me that our mainstream media these days aren't so interested in giving people, just the person in the street, their chance to say, what do they think about what's happening? And I think that's important, because I think if you don't have that, the politicians don't listen, and the people making the decisions don't listen, and they make mistakes.
As someone who's been a part of the media industry and the broadcast industry for close on 40 years, what do you deem as being the current health of the media landscape in New Zealand, and was this a contributing factor into looking into this new platform?
Look, I think we've got a lot more media than we used to. The technology has given everyone the ability, like you yourself, to produce content. And I reckon that's kind of cool. And man, it's changed the face of things. So we're not sitting there with, gosh, when I was a kid, you had one TV channel in black and white, and you didn't have any private radio stations, and you had 2 or 3 big newspapers, and that was it. So there wasn't a lot of diversity of views. So I think that change has been healthy. But the bad thing that's come along with it is that I think the idea of what I'd call the fourth estate or media has been slightly devalued. And I hate to sound like a grumpy old man, but what I would call the standards and the ethics of being a journalist or a broadcaster have largely been eroded. Just in the last couple of days in New Zealand, the political editor of one of our major TV channels on social media, under her own name, called the leader of a political party a cockwomble.
I don't know how you can get away with that.
Well, you can in the new world, because we've decided that that's okay. I don't think that is okay. I think it's okay for a journalist to think a politician is a cockwomble, but in the 8 years that I was in Parliament and in my parliamentary career, I would never say that publicly, because I've got to maintain a relationship with the people I report on. And I also have to, or I try to, and I've always tried to say, I'm looking at this from the perspective of my audience, not my own perspective. I'm kind of just the person in the middle. I'm the conduit. Talk radio's a little different. I'm encouraged, or have been encouraged, to have views, and often views that spark people to respond. And I don't mind a person in the street calling a political leader a cockwomble, and I'd have them on my show saying it. But if you're in the game, if you're a professional, I just think that's outrageous. And it is happening, to be honest, as journalists get onto social media, it is happening more and more. And, you know, part of the thing I'm working on for the new setup I'm doing is a pretty clear set of rules about what I expect from people if they work for me, and how I expect them to conduct themselves on their social media platforms.
Well, I think,
because otherwise it's anarchy, mate.
I think like there's like a misalignment between like social media and real life. Like there's a lot of, it's like Twitter. People act a certain way on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook or whatever that they would not act in a million years in person. Like you wouldn't go up to a colleague at work and call them a cockwomble. There's like
No.
let alone someone with a public platform. It's just an example. Yeah, as you're saying, there's like that set of standards is incredibly important for someone, or for for any journalist who are in that position of relative public power, giving the public news, important news. It's all well and good like having views and opinions and stuff, but in general, you would not share that stuff with co-workers.
No. And I think, it's funny, when emails first started, right? I can remember doing stories about people saying it's amazing how rude people are at emails. Like, so from the very start of the internet, this was a problem.
Yeah.
And I think, unfortunately, and you're living in a country now, it has affected the entire way that societies talk to each other and talk amongst themselves. And I don't think necessarily in a good way. And look, I am always up for an argument. But at the end of the day, any argument in New Zealand should finish with, I think you're a bugger, I disagree with you. Whose round is it? Who's getting the next round? We've got to be able to stay friendly or stay engaged.
Talking about America, do you think those current like traits and trends that I see over here with the likes of Tucker Carlson and CNN, the more opinion-based news channels, where as you mentioned with Talkback Radio, they are sort of like they're paid to exploit topics or to start conversations. Do you think that is having an influence as to what is deemed to be like cutting edge journalism in New Zealand? Do you think that type of opinion based and like, I gotcha, the type of journalism is influencing New Zealand journalism?
Yeah, I think it has. I think it's what's happened in America has influenced politics and media across the world, and I'll be honest, not in a good way. Talking about Tucker Carlson and those guys, they're morons. If I'm going to be quite frank, I know what they're doing because I've been doing this for a long time.
Yeah.
And I know when you're saying stuff just because you're told that's the position.
Yeah.
You come back to what journalism or broadcasting should be about. It should be about informing and entertaining and engaging people. And I don't think, and this comes back to the internet, I don't think it should be always about just reinforcing your audience's prejudices, right? It should be about expanding their minds, giving them more and more information to make their decisions on, even if you disagree with those decisions. But we live in a world now through the internet where the algorithm that even feeds people the news they consume is all designed to give them the dopamine hit, to give them what they want. And people end up in echo chambers and in bubbles of ignorance. And, you know, it's incredibly destructive. I mean, we look at the anti-vaxxer or vaccine hesitant people. Look, I love Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan got COVID, he got better, good on him, he's a hit. But it wasn't because of ivermectin. And Joe is not responsible for the legions of idiots that are now in New Zealand saying, take some horse dewormer and we can beat COVID. You know, this is madness, Sam. It is complete and utter madness. And I quite enjoy, I'm still very active on social media as I set this new platform up. I love taking the mickey out of them, because if you are being an idiot, I'm allowed to say you are, and you're allowed to say you disagree with me, but I'm not going to feed your ignorance. And it's not the job of any responsible broadcaster or journalist to feed ignorance. It is to create awareness.
Yeah, I think, like, you know, talking about Joe Rogan and stuff, he basically got me into starting this. Like many million other people look to him for insightful information and guests, and even just views on the world. Like, I know some of his views around the meat only diet and things are a bit strange, but I like how he sort of doesn't try to manipulate who he is. Like, he's obviously
No,
your
who he is. And you know what? I think that the success, part of Joe's success is, and I said it's like being the middle person. He asked the question probably that a lot of his audience would ask if they were lucky enough to be sitting in the studio talking to Elon Musk or talking to whoever.
Kanye West.
When I started at Morning Report, I'd get screeds of notes about stories of politicians and stuff, and I'd read them all. And sometimes I'd get answers and I didn't really know. I didn't have enough knowledge or expertise to know what the person was talking about. And because I guess I was a bit ego-driven and I didn't want to look stupid, I'd ask the next question. And then we'd get to the end of the interview and I would have no idea what the person was going on about. And after about 6 months of that, I said, I can't do this anymore because I just got no idea what's happening. I just have to ask. And if I didn't understand something that someone was saying, I said, could you explain that to me, please? Yeah. I don't get that. And suddenly I got people sending me letters back in those days or ringing in and saying, I was in the shower and someone was giving some BS. And I said, why don't you ask them this? And you ask them the question. And that's always the trick. What is the question that your listeners want answered, and how do you put that question in a way that they understand and identify with? Because otherwise it's just two people stroking each other, isn't it? And that's pretty boring to watch if you're not involved.
You get it a lot with like, I'm not naming any names, but like political sort of talk shows in New Zealand where the journalists would cut the politician off within the space of 20 or 30 seconds because they know what line of response that they're going down, and it's not the one that the network wants, and it's not the one that's going to get them likes.
Yeah, well, the other thing is sometimes, and I used to get accused of this on Morning Report, cutting people off. I got to the point, and I must have done 20,000 or more interviews on Morning Report, so I've done a lot. And I know the sentence structure and the tone that someone will use when they have no intention of directly answering the question. So we slap them. Well, we give them 3 cracks at it, and then we move on. You know.
Was there? There must be, and you know, there's no naivety around it as well. Like, most of these people who are in public limelights have got PR consultants, and
a lot of them are still pretty average, Sam.
Is there certain tricks that you can use to try and you can be like, hey, I see your bullshit. I see like what you're trying to spin right now. I know you're doing it.
and run and occasionally help people with media training, right? So I've kind of hunted both sides. The mistake that most people who go into an interview, into a news interview, make is they don't think about what they want to say, right? They don't know what they want to say. They are completely captured by the idea that they're sitting an oral exam and the journalist has all the questions and they have to be able to answer them. That's not actually what it's about. Do you have some information to impart? Don't care too much about the questions. They're just a prompt to get the conversation going. Say what you want to say and be careful not to say too much more, because that can get you in trouble. You know,
Yeah.
and I appreciate that's the deal as a journalist. If I get that information, right, if I get in my 3 or 4 minute interview, if I get the basic information I was searching for, that's okay. We've done the deal. We'll move on.
In your time as a journo, like you describe your best interview as door stopping Robert Mugabe after being.
That was probably the best 2 or 3 days of my life.
Can you explain what happened there? Like, are you after being tear gassed in Zimbabwe in 1991?
We go up to, it's the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, November 91, and it's in Harare in Zimbabwe. So Jim Bolger goes, takes up the Air Force plane, whole press gallery, all the New Zealand journalists are there. And we get there, and I'll tell you what, Zimbabwe in 1991, it got worse, but it was still a pretty weird place.
In what ways?
Very repressive. Economy was stuffed. Mugabe's troops sort of ruled with an iron fist. And we get there, and the whole conference was about democracy in the developing world. And I find out that Mugabe's army have surrounded about 3,000 or 4,000 students at Harare University, just 2.5 miles from where they're having this conference. And they haven't got any food or water, but they're all surrounded by Hippo armored personnel carriers because he doesn't want them protesting during this celebration of democracy. Now, I'll sort of cut. I managed to get in there. I managed to get an interview with the leader of the student union.
Okay.
He said what they wanted to protest was the fact that lecturers whose views didn't politically align with Mugabe's tended to disappear and never be seen again. And we're in the middle of doing this.
Fair point to protest.
Yeah. We're in the middle of the student interview, and suddenly I start crying. And I thought it's a good interview, but it's not that emotional. Then I look around, everyone's crying because I think understanding that something was going on inside, the army were moving in and they were firing tear gas canisters into the campus, which was surrounded by sort of, grass fields. And they were moving forward in like battle formation and firing rubber bullets and shotguns. So this guy throws me a wet towel that I wrap around my face, and we get outside, and the driver who snuck us in there has disappeared. And we're in the middle of this crowd of, 1,500 African students who are picking up rocks and sticks and stones and running towards this line of police, and there's tear gas, all sorts of stuff. And I looked at my producer, the producer, the soundman, the cameraman and me, and I said, well, look, they've got Hippo armored personnel carriers and guns, and these guys have got sticks and stones, but we were in the middle of this mass of people moving up this road. I said, where do we want to be when these two groups come together? And my producer said, probably not here. This probably isn't the right side to be on. And just then our driver comes up behind us, toot toot, we jump in the car, we drive through the crowd, but we get stopped actually by a young African lieutenant and his platoon, the guys who turned us away at gunpoint the night before when we tried to get in. And so we're surrounded by guys with SLR rifles pointed at us, and the cameraman's got a Webley revolver held to his head, and we think this hasn't turned out well. a white Zimbabwean farmer pulls up on the side of the road, gets out of his Toyota Land Cruiser, says, "Leave this to me." And he's wearing short stubbies and a toweling hat and a singlet. And he walks up to this guy with the revolver, the officer, and he says, "Boy," and he said to us, "Where are you from?" We said, "New Zealand." He said, "No problem." And he looks at this guy and says, "Boy, do you know where these people are from? They're from New Zealand. They're the reason you've got the vote, Garfield Todd. So just let them go, will you?" And these soldiers looked at this guy who was just ripping into them, drop their guns, and he looks at us and says, "Piss off as quick as you can." So we go back to the conference. We've got amazing footage of people being beaten and shot and tear gassed. And the rest of the media contingent at the conference had been covering the prime ministerial cricket match. They all started to get very quiet as we cut our story in the corner of the collective editing room we had. And my producer looked at me and said, "You know what we're missing? We really need Mugabe." And so we looked down and think, "Oh, he's having lunch with Brian Mulroney."
Right. Okay.
Over in the What's It What's room. And so
right.
I grabbed the cameraman and the soundman. We hide behind a pot plant. And he walks out of this thing with Mulroney. We stick the camera in the face and said, "Why are you shooting, beating, and tear gassing students 2.5 kilometres from here?" He wasn't that happy.
I'm surprised that they didn't make you try to get try to claim the footage from you guys.
Oh, well, we got away and we got it out pretty quickly. And they were unaware of what had happened. But anyway, his answer was, those students, they're all homosexuals, prostitutes, and drug addicts.
What?
And I said, that may well be, President Mugabe, but surely they have a right to peacefully demonstrate
Absolutely.
in a democratic country. To which, and he said, "You know they all have AIDS." And we said, "I don't care if they have AIDS, Mr. President. It's just not very
They can protest."
And he then said, tolerant. That Ian Smith still got his head on his shoulders. And we got it all on camp. And at that stage, the bodyguards start moving for the guns.
Yeah.
And we run back to the media compound. And I think we sold the story to the BBC and CNN as an exclusive. And that was a great day. And the night before, Nelson Mandela had made his first trip out of South Africa to come up to the Chogam.
Okay.
And we had kind of snuck into an official cocktail party that New Zealand journalists weren't meant to be at. And guess who walked in the door, walked up to us and said, "Hello, I'm Nelson Mandela." And one of us said, "We better go and get Bulger."
You're like, so what do you do? Yeah.
And he wasn't president of South Africa then. I was lucky enough to meet him 3 times. And that whole trip was just, amazing. Amazing.
It sounds incredible. You describe these fascinating encounters like this, but your most intense day as being a journalist as actually back in New Zealand hosting the morning report during 9/11.
Yeah.
You had to leave. You had to leave the next day for a month's trip to Europe. What was this time like, and what was traveling in this time like?
Yeah. Well, firstly, it is singularly and look, in an intense time period, singly the biggest story I've covered. I think actually COVID in some ways is a bigger story. But I was driving around 4:30 in the morning, driving into the office. I have the radio on, and our newsreader starts saying a plane appears to have hit, and a light plane at that stage. By the time I got to work, the buildings are on fire. And I think we did 6 or 7 hours straight, Jeff and I, and we were lucky enough to have a Radio New Zealand reporter, and she was at ground zero, basically. She was there on another trip, and she was calling him from a phone. And it really was the most intense, I think, live broadcasting I've ever done, and it was bloody important. But what happened then was I was meant to go to have 4 weeks in Europe as a kind of junket, to be honest, if I'm honest, Sam, bit of a junket, and I was going to make a documentary about the anti-globalization movement.
Okay.
And I ended up 3 days after 9/11, I'm in Geneva, and I am meant to be interviewing Mike Moore, New Zealand politician who was head of the World Trade Organization.
Mm-hmm.
Long stories, I finally got to interview Mike, and I tried to keep to my itinerary. But I flew from Geneva to Brussels, then to Berlin, then to London, then to Dublin. And every time I got on a plane, there was a new restriction, right? And I can remember going through a hub in Frankfurt where a group of, I think, Saudi Arabians in full Arab dress in a crowded transit lounge were sitting there, and no one would sit within 50 feet of them. And I went down and sat next to them and said, "G'day, my name's Sean, I'm from New Zealand. I don't know if you speak English."
Good on you.
By the time I was flying to Dublin from Heathrow, I witnessed a 75-year-old Irish grandmother having her nail scissors confiscated from her. So I actually travelled as the whole setting for how we travelled the world closed down on us. And the night I left to come back to New Zealand from Heathrow, the flight got delayed because the Americans started bombing Afghanistan, and the flight path would have taken us over Afghanistan. Got upgraded to first class all the way back to Auckland, which was nice.
Nice.
But I think our stopover was in Chennai in India. So, look, that was a remarkable time. And I've actually, in the last couple of days, been looking at documentaries and flicking back through books I read. I don't think we can underestimate, and even in the terms of what we were talking about before, how brutal or how polarized politics is, that attack on 9/11 was actually where that started. And I think America and I think the world bought into the fear. And look, he might be feeding the fishes in the Indian Ocean somewhere, but if Osama bin Laden wanted to change the way Westerners live and damage their lives, he did it because we all took the fear pill, and America got into revenge and warrior culture and never-ending wars. I mean, look what's happening in Afghanistan now. So in terms of, for me, memorable days, but also I think significant days just in my lifetime, 9/11 is right up there.
Yeah, it's the only sort of, it's not a comparative, but I was in Florida in February last year for my first golf tournament of that season, and I was there for about 4 days, and we covered the first day of golf, and we're watching, having a few beers that night, and we're watching the news over there, and this was when COVID really hit everyone's like households. Everyone's awareness of COVID, and sports leagues were shutting down all across the world.
The NBA were the first sign it was really serious, where the NBA started cancelling games.
Yeah,
I can remember watching that and think, man, this is gonna be big.
And it did, It was big. So like the NBA announced that they'd be stopping, I think maybe baseball or the football or someone else, and then the PGA Tour did an announcement that night and said, hey, tomorrow we went from like a full crowd on the first day to no crowd on the second day to we're postponing the entire season indefinitely the next day. And I remember sitting there in our hotel room, and I'd only been over in America for 4 days, and Ian was chatting to us. He said, right, we're going back to New Zealand tomorrow. Like this is real. We need to go home. We don't know what's going to happen with transport. We don't know what's going to happen over here in America. We don't know how anyone's going to respond to this. We need to go home. So what was supposed to be like a 9-month trip lasted 4 days. And so I spent a couple months in New Zealand doing lockdown and stuff. And then I flew back to America in June last year, right when the Black Lives Matter protests were going on, right when quarantine was in full effect. And I just knew, like, the moment you got there, like, travel had changed for the future. Like, travel has not been the same since. Everything is not the same since.
No, no, and it will, but that too will be an event that, alters our world. Absolutely. And but you got to say it's exciting being part of it, and
Yeah,
being connected to it. This is what life throws up.
it is, and we get really like first class care. Like we've got access to nurses, all sort. They don't really leave any stone unturned in this industry over here. So I'd like to move on to more New Zealand politics.
Mm.
I've noticed it over here the past 18 months. When I've been here, they're like, you know, my name is Sam. They're like, oh, where you from? It's normally Australia or the UK. But when I say little old New Zealand, they say, oh, Jacinda Ardern. Like this is,
Yeah,
amazing Prime Minister. And
yeah,
it is really cool that, and it's world leading in the fact that she's had a baby on the job and she is a really powerful global female leader.
yeah,
What do you think?
yeah.
Why do you think there is such a fascination for Jacinda Ardern, especially over here in America? Like she gets millions of views on YouTube and stuff.
Look, I think she was everything that Donald Trump wasn't.
Mm.
Young, articulate, really nice in terms of her family, a good parent, right? And pretty straight up and down in that great New Zealand way. So I think she became a little bit of a beacon or a lightning rod for those who were and many on the left, so disappointed, so anti-Trump. And I think the narrative became almost globally that if Donald Trump was one thing, Jacinda Ardern was completely the other thing, right? So she got branded in that polarization of politics.
Right.
And look, let's be honest, every New Zealander likes it when our Prime Minister is cool internationally. The first time I ever saw it was David Lange.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And David Lange at the Oxford Union taking on people who were into nuclear weapons and wiping the floor with them. And I can remember, going to press conferences, having foreign journalists over here with Lange, and they were just blown away by how articulate he was, how sharp he was. So it's happened before. I don't know that always it does the politician domestically a lot of good.
Mm.
But I think New Zealanders love it, and quite rightly so. We should be proud of Jacinda Ardern. She has, well, I don't know, I thought Helen Clark was a great Prime Minister too, and she went on to sort of international fame.
Mm-hmm.
So I think
I can see the same path making itself for Jacinda.
Yeah. But I'm never one really. I put Mandela in a different bracket. I'm not one to idolize politicians. They get elected and they get unelected, and prime ministers come and go. I would say I always try to give whoever the prime minister is, and I get upset, to be honest, once again with social media and indeed people I know or people in general who do not give the office of prime minister the respect it deserves, because it does. It does deserve respect, and certainly internationally they are representing us. I had a crack at Alan Jones, and a woman called Katie Hopkins in the state. When you see, even though you might agree with parts of what they're saying, when foreign commentators have a crack at Jacinda Ardern, I always tweet back to them and say, hey, that's our Prime Minister. If anyone's going to give them the business, it'll be us guys, okay?
Yeah, well, she's like, I mean, like the airtime she had on like Stephen Colbert's show, like I remember John Key had to pay, or the taxpayer had to pay thousands of dollars to get on the Letterman show just for like a 30-second piece about like some corny thing.
But I imagine, to be honest, I don't think that happened just by chance. There would have been government money expended towards all that as well.
Yeah.
And look, that's okay. I love Colbert.
Yeah. Who's, speaking about like local politicians, who has been the most impressive politician that you interviewed in your time, and who's more like underrated as well? That they might be prime ministers, or they might just be like your typical backbencher as well.
Well, like I say, in my time, Lange was just the master of the press conference, and linguistically and in terms of humour. Never been anything like him.
David
For
Long,
sheer
yeah.
brief intellect, Helen Clark. But Helen Clark started the trend of not fronting or choosing, or very subtly making sure she was interviewed by people that, she felt would give her a good go. And I still talk to Helen Clark when I see her. I was one of the people she wasn't so keen on being interviewed by. But as I say, that's a certain form of respect, and that's the business we're in. So you respect that it's a tough game. I'll be honest, I didn't ever find John Key that engaging. I could never figure the guy out. I'd like to talk to Jacinda more, but I don't get the chance. And I think she has, certainly international sort of thing-wise, there's been nothing like her since Longing. I guess, strangely enough, on a personal sense, the Prime Minister, even though it was only for a few weeks, that I liked and got on best with was Mike Moore.
Right, okay.
Who was really a person of the people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think really connected with you. I also, to be honest, got on pretty well with Jim Bolger. We don't often have a really crappy Prime Minister in this country,
No, we're pretty lucky. We're pretty lucky.
We're all right with who we get. Yeah.
For a small country of 5 million people, you can't really afford to steer that far away from the centre. And both Labor and National and whoever they elect, they tend to hug the centre. I mean, this is coming from a 25-year-old, what do I know? But they tend to hug the centre, and they do have their own fringe policies that do set them apart. But you can't afford to be too radical in New Zealand, and that goes with personalities as well. Do you think the current government are as popular as they are due to the opposition being fractured? Like, hypothetically speaking,
I think you can put that almost solely down to the appeal of Jacinda Ardern.
Mm-hmm.
They were miles behind in, 2017, right? And I was involved in politics at that stage. I was doing some work for the Top Party and Gareth Morgan as their communications advisor. And I tell you, we had tracking from Labor and National to the point where they were ringing me and saying, who do we do the coalition deal with when you guys get to 5%?
Really?
We were at 3.8% 6 weeks out from the election, and it was all looking good. And then Jacinda Ardern announced that she was taking over from Andrew Little. And I point out, I think Andrew Little, and standing aside then, that was one of the most selfless acts I've ever seen from any politician in any party. So overnight, the landscape changed, and we went from, there's 3.7% on both Labor and National's tracking polls to 0.4%.
Wow.
And every available swinging female voter jumped on the bandwagon. We managed to get back to 2.7%, which at that time was, I think, 9 times more votes than the ACT Party got. But only because Gareth said something slightly obnoxious about Jacinda, and we were back in the news. So I think Labor's popularity is almost entirely due to her. And look, National are where Labor was before Jacinda. Remember, they who did they go through? Gosh, it's hard to keep up. They had Cunliffe, they had Shearer, they had Goff, right? Yeah. And then they got to Little. So this isn't anything unprecedented.
Is it the natural cycle of a political party like this? As you say, this mirrors 2011 Labor government, Labor opposition. Sorry, is this just the natural flow of an opposition government to go through leaders and to find its own identity again?
Yeah, I think so. I think the most interesting thing in politics at the moment is the rise of ACT and David Seymour, who are now, he's now second preferred Prime Minister, and he's getting 8-9% in the polls. And I think the reason of that is he's talking that straight language with people. He's not a Trump, but he is hitting the mark on issues that middle New Zealand, and I use that in the broadest sense, have concerns about. What I don't see is National and ACT necessarily having the same sort of close or philosophical relationship that the Greens and Labor do.
Right.
So that presents a challenge. At the moment, Labor would need the Greens to govern, but geez, we're still a long way out. And I suspect COVID is going to provide some political surprises everywhere in the world.
Mm-hmm.
We are running, and not necessarily for good reasons, people are running out of patience on COVID. They want it to end. And it's a bit like Churchill wins World War II. Oh, well, we don't want to be reminded of World War II. We'll have the other lot and thank you. And I suspect we might get a little bit of that next election.
That's what, like, I know it's probably not a good comparison to make, but like over here in America, their response to COVID, a lot of people were receptive at the start, like sort of March through July, August last year. They said, hey, you know, we'll do what we need to do in a relative sense. You know, they everyone I saw had masks on. Everyone was social distancing. A couple of the airlines were like not selling the middle seat, and there was a sort of view in the public that what needed to be done, it should get done, but that was really short lived. And that at the moment, or like for the past 12 months at least, they've just said like, F it, like we're just going to go about our lives as we would normally. And this week they've got college football back, and there's crowds of 100 to 120,000 people turning up. I think the way that New Zealand handled the pandemic should be applauded initially, in the government, as opposed to America, were quite fast off the line in dealing with our own borders, at least, and dealing with the safety of the people. I think, as you mentioned, the surprises that COVID would sort of have present themselves. This current government might experience some drawback if New Zealand's public had the appetite of doing one big lockdown middle of last year. We're like, right, let's get it done. And then now it's almost
we
like
all sorts of advantages, Sam, didn't we? We're absolutely surrounded by sea. We've got 2 or 3 points of entry.
Yeah,
we've got a very dispersed population of 5 million people. We've got less people per square mile than most other developed countries in the world. We are, believe it or not, a pretty homogenous and unified society. We have good lines of communication. And I'll say this of the administration of Jacinda Ardern: they very quickly and clearly, in the early days certainly, were very good at communicating the simple messages people needed to get to form a workable consensus.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, when you look back now, much of what they did and asked New Zealand to do, they had no legal right to, and they had to go and change a whole lot of laws to actually say, if we have another lockdown, we can legally enforce it. But I thought the communication and the creation of a sense of national purpose, and look, the team of 5 million, it worked. I don't know that amount of goodwill exists now. And look, as for the states, I often say this, and I've got a lot of friends, and I see people on Twitter, people have been obsessed by American politics in this country and around the world for years, ever since Trump, probably ever since Clinton, actually, and Lewinsky.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be honest, I don't, when I run talk shows, spend a lot of time talking to people who are raving about Trump.
Yeah.
Because I can't vote there. These people don't govern me. I don't live under their laws.
Yeah.
And I'm a real believer, if people are interested in politics and want to get involved in care, that begins at home, like charity. And I've seen people have pitched arguments about Trump and pubs in New Zealand. Why would you bother?
Yeah.
And I'm sure American politicians don't really give a toss what New Zealanders think.
No.
But it seems to me, watching American politics and getting your blood pressure up about it has almost become a pastime for people in New Zealand. And I really do wish they wouldn't be so silly.
It happens so much. Like I get like I'm in a new city every single week over here. I'm on average one to two flights a week, and so I get a pretty good summary of on the ground America. Granted, we often just go from a hotel to a country club back to a hotel to the airport, but whenever we are out, you do get an idea of what the people are like in each state, and I get messages from friends and family back home talking about politics at the higher up, or there's been another shooting or the likes, and they say, Sam, like, are you safe? Are you all of this stuff, and it happened especially a lot in the Black Lives Matter protests last year, when then there was this real public unease going on.
Well, the media, watching it from here, Sam, and I think said on the radio, let's analyse the numbers. The impression that was created by CNN and Fox News was that every major city in the United States was on fire.
Yeah,
that's nowhere was safe.
That's the problem. Like I was getting messaged, and then I was on the ground, it was fine. I was in the middle of Dallas, and like during a Black Lives Matter protest last year, and there was unease around quarantine and stuff. And sure, there is always going to be outlier cases of nutcases and crazy people. I mean, the country's got 300 million people, so but on the ground, it was people like you and me and everyday New Zealanders just going about their lives, and it is the 1% or the fraction of society who granted were uneasy about a number of things, but the media were portraying that as the majority of what was going on on the ground, and it was not like that at all.
Yeah, and so of course people watch it here, they don't understand how the media works, and they think the world's ending, and they lose their minds, and the sky's falling. It's a bit like climate change.
Yeah, like I was in Washington in September last year, when this was like 4 weeks before the election, and they were saying, there's protests everywhere. I was there, and there was absolutely no one in the city because of COVID. There was, granted, it was really strange because the Capitol building and the White House were all boarded up. It looked like post-apocalyptic America, but the on the ground sort of interpretation by the media of how America actually is so far from the truth. Like 99% of these guys on the ground here have got their own families, they've got their own lives, their livelihoods, their homes, and they just want to get on with their lives. They don't know what's happening on a government level. Like they're just trying to live their lives, and there are a number of differences in the Constitution and gun rights and freedoms, sort of state by state responsibility and stuff. But for the most part, on the ground, they're just trying to go about their work and live their lives. That they're not talking about Trump. They're not talking about Biden.
And Sam, I guess the same thing happened here following the mosque shooting, which last year, right? The narrative that was created by the media, and I hate to say with the connivance of the government and a whole lot of very liberal, and I'm going to use the word woke agencies of state, was that horrible crime was the result, and the effect that was allowed to happen was all down to racism and structural racism and systemic racism and radicalization and hate speech. And it wasn't, it was a nutter with a gun. Just the same way that what's just happened was a nutter with a knife.
Yeah.
And, we're now on this thing, do we change our freedom of speech laws, our hate speech laws, because we think we can stop that? Well, BS. Yeah, take the guns, make it harder to get a gun, or say you can't have a gun that's basically designed for killing people.
Mm-hmm.
You have a gun that's designed for hunting or target shooting, but not one that's, that has the ability to kill people in huge numbers.
Yeah.
But we can't, we can't ban knives.
That's the craziest reaction I've seen.
It's a bit like 9/11. It was our mini 9/11.
Yeah.
Right? We chose the fear of, there are only 750 at a stretch white supremacists in New Zealand, and the police know them all by name and their addresses.
Mm-hmm.
Right? New Zealand is very good at picking out nutters and, treating them in the manner to which they should be treated. So in a small way, that's probably the thing that concerns me most about New Zealand right now, is that we have had people who have other agendas to spin off things like the attack in Newland and the mosque shooting. And they are not people who are keen on having an open and free democratic society. They're ideologues, and a lot of them, unfortunately, I think, Sam, are in the media, and a lot of them work for government departments.
A lot of it is reacting quite dramatically just for the sake of reacting, and just for the sake of looking like you are taking it seriously without any research.
Cool.
Yeah, without any research to back up that what you are doing is actually going to make a difference. Like, sure, there's like, the knife attack was horrific, and that it should have been prevented by all measures, but by any respectable measure. But there's banning knives in the country. Having a supermarket chain banning knives throughout the whole country is not going to do it. Like,
interesting though, there's a slightly swanky supermarket called Moore Wilson's in Wellington.
Mm-hmm.
Moore Wilson's has always had its knives locked up in cabinets. It's sharp knives, always done it. So look, I think it's been quite an interesting few weeks here, and I think a whole lot of people who were very vocal after the mosque shooting are not quite so vocal now. And the unfortunate and the truth of life, when I was about 25 or 26, I covered and you may not even remember this given your age, there was a massacre in Dunedin in which 12 people died, including children, were shot by a nutter with a gun.
Yeah, for sure.
And he didn't have the internet, but he went down to the local library and he got a copy of Mein Kampf.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we didn't ban Mein Kampf or lock up the Dunedin public librarian, did we?
Yeah.
We accepted the fact that, sadly, and I think you made a really good point earlier, there are more nutters with guns in America because there are more people in America and there's more access to guns.
Mm-hmm.
But we cannot, we can't destroy our society to protect against the absolute outliers.
It'll never work as well. I'd like to change tack slightly now and talk Jordan Peterson. For the listeners who aren't aware, Peterson is a Canadian professor of psychology, a clinical psychologist, a YouTube personality, and author. He's begun to receive quite widespread and often viral attention for his various views on cultural and political issues. I, for once, was quite influenced by him during 2018, 2019, with his self-improvement lectures and thoughts around people, picking up their own cross, so to speak, and gaining personal responsibility and setting your own goals and stuff. Why is he so misinterpreted by the media?
Well, it's funny. Look, I've met Jordan Peterson. I've interviewed him, and still correspond with him occasionally. It's a bit like what we talked about journalism. Actually, all his academic stuff doesn't really matter that much. He has an ability to say what inherently you know to be true and that you are thinking, because he understands the psychology of how we construct our lives and our egos and how we interact with other people, because he's studied it. He's an expert. And he was, when I started work back on it was Magic Talk, I said to my producer in November, I knew that he was coming in March, I think, to New Zealand. And I said, I don't care if you do nothing, provide me no support as a producer, but I want to have an interview with Jordan Peterson. And I'd kind of identified him very early on as someone who was going to be in the culture wars. And you could see how New Zealand's left-wing movement was moving on him. And I had read a lot of his stuff and looked back, and what I couldn't find I couldn't find homophobia, intolerance. I couldn't find a whole lot of right-wing extremism either.
Yeah.
I found a lot of
Nothing.
common sense. And I showed a few other people his videos, and they said, well, that's just like what a good dad would say, you know.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So I tried to get him, and there's people who are very cooperative. It's a pretty multi-layered zone of access around Jordan Peterson.
In what ways is he just that
Oh, no,
protected now?
I talked to the publishing house here. They said, oh, he's got his own team of people. They don't really communicate. They're a law unto themselves. And you understand when you're riding that sort of global popularity wave. So we had at best a promise that we might get 2 minutes with him on the radio or something. But in New Zealand, a very extreme left-wing group called Aotearoa Peace Action put out a press release about 8 days ahead of his visit, saying that Jordan Peterson was reprehensible and he represented a threat to all decency and values in New Zealand. So I thought we'd do an interview on the radio, so we rang them up and they agreed to do an interview. And
what was it like to interview him? Like, were you conscious about how it was going to go?
Well, look, can I just say the person may have been going through a gender transition, the person I was talking to. But I've done some research on this group and found that just a year or so earlier, they had created and planted a fake bomb in a movie theatre in Wellington full of old people. It was a movie about Ben Gurion, and of course they're pro-Palestinians.
Right.
And a number of their key players were people who had been arrested for literally, as close as you get in those days, acts of terrorism in New Zealand. And let's just say the spokesman they put up had no idea. And it was probably the most clinical and calm interview I've ever done. It was on camera and it was on audio. It's had, I think, about 860,000 views on YouTube.
Yeah, yeah.
But one person who saw it very quickly was Jordan Peterson.
Right, right.
And after the interview, my producer comes up with her phone and she said, Jordan Peterson is on the line.
Wow.
From Australia. And I said, hi, Jordan. He said, I just saw your interview. He said, that was better than Kathy Newman.
Nice.
He said, what do you want? And I said, tomorrow, I want an hour with you by Skype from Sydney. You'll take calls from the listeners. And he did it for me. And then he put out on his YouTube platform that interview and the interview with the Auckland Peace Action person. And that's probably the most viewed piece of media I've ever done. You don't sort of recreate that. It was sheer dumb luck. And that in many ways set the tone for what I guess the Magic Talk Show has been about. And that is that people do not listen to what people like Jordan Peterson say. They simply decide, oh, what side am I on?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I'll go with the cool kids or the woke kids. Peterson's had his problems. He's had family problems. And to be honest, given when I met him, when he came to Auckland a couple of weeks later, I looked at him and I actually said to the person I was sitting next to, I said, there is a guy right on the edge. And he was clearly heading, to do what he did and to get that level of fame and accolades and also that level of hatred. Takes it out of you. But I'll tell you what else I saw at the meeting I went to. I saw a hell of a lot of young people, young men. I saw a hell of a lot of Asian people. And I saw a disproportionately large number of gay people, and including in that particular night, people who I think were transgender or something. And they were happy to be there and talk to him. And I don't think he was talking down to people at all. And I was amazed at the diversity.
Yeah, it certainly helped me. Like, it was, he sort of expresses points that you subconsciously know, but you are aware of at the same time. Like, you're not consciously aware of it. And he's got a way of talking that it really resonates with a lot of young, as he said, disproportionately young men, even, you know, people of minority groups like gay people, transgender people, because it's all about not comparing yourself to other people and picking up your own cross and tidying up your own, you know, tidying up your own room is basically just get your own shit sorted before you go out and criticize the world. Like, make sure that the things in your own backyard are working as they should before you try to take
And
it
the
out on
other
other
thing,
people.
once you've done that, Sam, and you've tidied up your own room, that can sometimes be really hard, right?
Really
And
hard.
I think once you've been through that process, you look at people who you might think don't have their shit together.
Yeah.
And I think once you've been through the process, you're less inclined to go, you don't have your shit together, and say, how can I help?
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, which is a far better way to run the world than running around saying, that Jordan Peterson, he's bad, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So how can viewers and listeners find more of your work? How can they sort of interact with you on social media? You're
Well,
on Twitter,
me,
I think.
At Sean Plunket on Twitter or Sean Plunket on Facebook, but hopefully from the end of January next year, they will be able to download an app called The Platform. And in its first iteration, that will give them essentially a talk radio show that they can ring into and talk and give their opinions. And it'll give them a bit of news and a bit of sport and a bit of culture. And that will grow into podcasts taken off that platform. It'll be streaming video and audio in pretty short order. And then it will become a place for writers, and largely good writers who can't get a gig in mainstream media or have been deplatformed. We'll bring their work together and aggregate their work as well.
Fantastic.
And
Well,
and the other thing is, no money from the government, no editorial compromise from advertisers. And it's taken a while to set up. And also completely funded by New Zealand.
great. That sounds
Not
like
my overseas interest.
an exciting new venture. I look forward to seeing it end of January, roughly, and I look forward to seeing how it's gonna go in New Zealand and how responsive the public are going to be to it. So it was a pleasure to.
Well, I think there's a market.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's not about that. I've said to a couple of people, they said, oh, how much money are you going to make about that? And I said, you know, where we started talking about journalism, I do feel a kind of responsibility not to turn the clock back, but to change what we've got into something better. You know, and that's really what the project is all about. The platform is all about.
Great. Well, it's really, really exciting to hear, and there's nobody better point to end this on than that. It's been a pleasure to have a chat with you. It was entertaining and informative, and all the best.
Well, tell Ian I say hello, and next time you're back in New Zealand, we'll catch up for a beer.
Absolutely. That sounds great. Thank you.
All right, Sam.